You have this thing listed under follow-up. I don't think it's follow-up at all. It's a new topic, but you just want to talk about it. This is how you steal the show all the time. You put everything you want to talk about, you list it as follow-up, even if it's not remotely follow-up.
Well...
Yeah, I know your trick. I know what you're up to.
It wasn't really a trick. I thought it kind of was follow-up.
There's nothing about it that's follow-up. The listeners will know. Listeners will know now.
This is my hairdresser story. And the reason I wanted to tell you was I thought it had two components that would appeal to you. Because if there are two things that sort of have some level of appeal to you, one is being horrified by social situations.
Is that appealing? I don't think that's appealing.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. It always gets a response from you, at least.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
think
so hard to get
that's what
responses
you mean
from
here,
you.
Brady. Right? It's your,
Yeah.
you, because you are a natural winder-upper. You in your brain equate getting a response from someone to appealing to them. That's just the way you see the world.
But it's just so hard to get you to engage with my stories unless it's something that you're really into.
That is not true.
It's very hard to get you to engage. And I think this has two things that engage you. One is you are engaged by horrifying social situations. And the other thing that engages you is my ineptitude. And this story has both of them in spades.
I'm looking forward to the story, but I do just want to get it on record that when we're doing the podcast, I know you don't believe me, and I always cut it because you sometimes yell at me about how I don't respond fast enough to you. The reason I find these podcasts so draining to do is that whenever you're talking, I am spending the whole time consciously thinking about, is there a question that I can ask Brady? What can I say to Brady at the end of this story? So it's draining. It's exhausting because I am spending 100% of my attention fixated on you, thinking about what to say and how to engage with this conversation.
That should just come naturally. That should just be natural.
Yeah, it should be natural. It should be natural if you're a Brady, but not if you're a Gray. If you're a Gray, it's not natural. That's why it's always so frustrating. It's always so frustrating when you criticize me for not engaging in your stories. It's like, man, I am never more focused on human conversation than I am during the 3 hours in which we record one of these episodes. You've got me at my peak social. This is the best I can do. And I do it for you, Brady.
Don't focus too much because it puts too much pressure on the story now. It's like, now I know that you're sort of listening with this double attention and thinking of questions, and suddenly there's a lot of pressure on the story, and the story's not that good.
It's no different than any other time that we ever record the podcast. So now, tell me this amazing, amazing story. I'm really looking forward to it.
I drove down into the center of my town because I wanted to get the car cleaned, give it the big shebang.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether I should call that valeting or valeting, because that seems to be something that people...
It's a valet, so it's valeting.
That's what I thought, but more and more often I'm hearing people calling it valeting, which I think is wrong, of course.
Yeah, of course it's wrong. Isn't it a French word? They don't regard consonants at the end of their words.
So I took the car down to this place where there are these guys who wash it. They've got like this... What would you call it? Not like tent, like a little marquee type thing that people can drive in underneath so that they're sheltered in case it rains. And they'll sit there and they'll spray your car and then they'll open the doors and they'll get inside and vacuum it and polish everything and make your car lovely. I take it there reasonably often. And because I was going to go and get my hair cut and I had some errands to run, I leave it with them, leave the keys in the ignition, and I say, guys, take care of it for me. So I parked it just outside the little...
Do you say it like that? So seriously?
Well,
I just like, it was like you're leaving a baby with them. Guys,
I say
take care of this.
No, we discuss which option I want, and I went for the £20 option.
I was gonna say, yeah, the way you communicate to them how much they should take care of it is with money. That's how you communicate this.
Yes. So I want the £20 option, and I couldn't park it right in the little zone because they were doing another car. So I parked behind that car and I left. Went to the post office, went to the bank, did my jobs, and then I went to the hairdresser. Mm-hmm. I picked a bad time. Schools were out, and I picked the wrong time of day, a time that I don't normally like to go, and the place was packed. I had to sit there and wait forever for my turn. And I could have said I'll come back another day, but I really needed to get my hair cut. So I had to wait it out, and I must have waited an hour and a half, and then finally got my hair cut. And he was slow too. He was a slow one.
An hour and a half, Jesus.
And here comes the situation. At the end of the haircut, I thought he did a pretty good job, albeit slow. At the end of the haircut, he says, "Can I take a photo?"
What?
And I thought, maybe he was a trainee or this was one of the best haircuts he'd ever done. I don't know, but he wanted to take a photo of it. And I was kind of like, yeah, I guess. And then I said, what for? And he said, oh, I want to put it on Instagram.
No.
And I thought, what would Gray do if the hairdresser said, can I take a photo of you and put it on Instagram?
No.
And it's a really awkward situation.
Okay, here's the question. Was he using social dominance on you? Like, were you still sitting down or were you still bibbed up?
I was sitting down. I was still had my big coat on. I was very vulnerable.
No.
I was in a position of weakness.
It's like an interrogation room.
Yeah, it was a really awkward situation. But I know this is becoming a big thing in the young people's hairdresser community because
Is it really?
my nephew was showing me the Instagram of his hairdresser, and everyone who gets their hair cut by him has an Instagram done, and they do these special poses and things like that. So it's becoming a really big thing in the trendy, cool hairdresser community. And this hairdresser I go to is quite a trendy, cool place for young people. They're really big on Instagramming all the haircuts afterwards.
No. That's.
I gave it a no. I did. I found the strength, and I gave him a thanks, but no thanks.
How was it received?
Quiet and awkwardly. I did think, oh my goodness, Gray would have hated that.
Are you ever going to go back to this person?
Yeah, I'll go back.
No, you can't go back.
When it comes to hairdressers, I am such a creature of habit. That's why I sat there for an hour and a half instead of going to one of the 4 or 5 other ones on the street, because this is where I get my haircut.
4 or 5 other ones? You mean in that tiny town where you live? There's not 4 or 5 hairdressers on the street.
There
in
is.
that tiny town.
There totally is.
No, you have like 3 shops on the street. There's like
I'm
a
telling
corner
you.
store.
There's a corner store. There's a corner store, a car wash, 3 charity shops, and 19 hairdressers.
What a strange local economy.
Anyway, I got out of there. Awkward situation over. Go to the car wash, ready to be apologetic for having left my car there for 2.5 hours. I get there. My car hasn't moved. I'm like, what's going on? I walk up to the guy saying, what's going on? And they look at me going, oh, there you are. Turns out of just habit and reflex, I didn't leave my keys in the ignition, and I took them with me. And my car had been sitting there blocking the entrance to their little car wash marquee thing for the last 2.5 hours.
What an effective afternoon of errands you had.
It was terrible. I felt so bad. I felt so bad about it.
That Instagram thing, though, man, that's horrifying. This Instagram, it doesn't sound like anything good is coming of it, as far as I can tell.
It's a real big thing in the hairdressing community, at least in the west of England.
Nope. Not having it. No, that's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Not ever. Not ever.
I made some reference to sort of like, with my job, I'd rather not have like hairdresser pictures posted of me. And then he thought I was some kind of spy or did something like to do with security, and I just didn't correct him.
Wait, so you started to make up a story to justify why you.
Yeah, I did. I sort of said something like, "Oh, with my work, it's something I'd rather not be doing."
It's very hard not to do. But I find the trick in those situations, if you're going to have to say no, is don't justify, right? You just say no, and then there's going to be an awkward silence, but the first person to break the awkward silence loses. And so you don't want to be the loser.
Well, no, I still got my way, but I mean, I don't think you would find that hard. You're double hard when it comes to that stuff, but...
Yeah, but if the other person plays it sounds like this guy who's trying to manipulate you. Again, you were in a vulnerable position. That's when he decides to ask. He probably knows the tricks. I'm just imagining in this situation that he would have also tried to beat the awkward silence, and sometimes that can go on for a while. It's like a staring contest between gorillas.
I don't think either I looked that good or the haircut was that good that he was going to really lobby for it. But maybe it was a once in a generation haircut, and I don't even realize it, and I just look amazing right now.
I didn't notice on the video chat before we started. I'm sorry. I really am finding myself wishing that the story had gone the other way, mainly because I would enjoy nothing more than putting a link to your photograph on Instagram of your haircut in the show notes. I would really quite enjoy that. Like, oh, this will be fun forever, this little picture here. But we're having to miss out on it.
Didn't happen.
Do you want to give us a selfie for the show notes?
the reason I really needed to get it cut was because I was doing some objectivity videos the next day. So you can do me an even bigger favor and just post one of those.
It's way less funny if I'm just pimping objectivity. I mean, I guess I'll do it.
Yeah.
Link to objectivity in the show notes, people. But it's not nearly as funny. It's like, it's not really what I want from you, Brady. You're not giving me what I want.
Charlie Brooker, who I think you and I are both big fans of, we quite like some of the things he does. He was just having a bit of a gripe because some recent stuff that came up in the Parliament, or came up in the Parliament. And that is the fact that, and I think this is crazy, that satirical television shows are not allowed to use footage from inside the UK Parliament. And this has been hamstringing Charlie Brooker, who makes satirical TV shows for quite some time, because when he wants to poke fun at the politicians, they have banned all TV shows like him from using the footage of proceedings in Parliament. It can be used on the news, it can be used in various other shows, but if you're poking fun at them, banned.
I don't understand how such a law could get passed.
By the people in the Parliament.
Yeah, I find that just astounding, that the people in Parliament would pass such a narrowly self-serving law. It's confusing to me. I don't get it.
I think it's almost so self-serving that I'm surprised they had the audacity to do it.
They had the balls to do it.
Yeah.
For comparison, for Americans, like the stuff Charlie Brooker does, it's a bit like if Congress passed a law saying that The Daily Show was not allowed to use footage from inside of Congress. Like, C-SPAN footage is available to everybody unless you're making fun of C-SPAN footage.
When The Daily Show itself pokes fun at the UK and uses footage from the UK Parliament, those episodes are banned from being broadcast in the UK.
Copyright and intellectual property, it comes up on this show so much, and it's a thing that I've been following for years, because it really does have this bizarre impact on everything. Like, the way that we decide intellectual property works has huge unexpected ramifications in all kinds of areas. And like, this is just another example. Like, really, United Kingdom, you are going to ban the import of satirical shows from overseas because they include footage from Parliament? It's so weird. And it also feels a little bit like you guys know that, like, this stuff exists on the internet, right? Like, people can still view the programs. I don't know what you're trying to do here, except just preventing local producers from being able to make stuff. Like, you're just.
I mean, they are making it harder to see, because it is harder to find that stuff. The thing that I have some sympathy, for example, with Britain being a bit more draconian than other countries like the US with televising proceedings in courtrooms and things like that. I have some sympathy with not televising everything and broadcasting everything, or protecting people from being humiliated when they're doing normal things. But not the MPs, not the people in the Parliament. That they're the one group that we should be allowed to mock and satirise. And
yeah, I completely agree with you there as well, right? Like, I think as we discussed on our Making a Murderer episode, the US goes crazy far in what it allows to be broadcast. Like, I don't think that there should be broadcasts inside of courtrooms. Like, that seems antithetical to justice. But yeah, I completely agree. It's like, public servants engaged in public debate, like, you can't use this footage to make fun of people. Like, that's bizarre. And what I really want to know, right? Like, so we have just seen these tweets from Charlie Brooker. What I want to know is how does this affect a YouTube channel like, I always forget his name. Is it Mixtape Boy? Is that the one?
Cassette Boy. Yeah.
Cassette Boy, thank you. I can see his little Pirate Bay kind of logo there. But Cassette Boy is this guy who does these amazing mashups of political footage, and that just, I cannot imagine how many hours of work he goes through to like recut politicians' speeches so that they're saying completely opposite things. Like, trust me, people, I've seen this stuff done before. The Cassette Boy does it amazingly well. But so, like, does this ban on programs that are poking fun at Parliament, does it include internet producers within the UK? Because Cassette Boy is located within the UK. This to me seems like it's the kind of thing that might just blow up into a bit of a Streisand effect problem if you're also going to try to ban it on the internet. It's Yeah, this copyright stuff is just ridiculous.
I'll have to rewatch a bit of Cassette Boy stuff, but in my head, most of the stuff he uses is from like press conferences and outside the Parliament. So I wonder if he does use parliamentary footage. I can't remember now.
Yeah, I agree with you. Most of the stuff I've seen is outside of it, but it's still the idea of it. Like, could he use something from within Parliament? I don't know.
I'm not sure they can be shamed. I'm reading this article about it, and it points out that after one of Jon Stewart's daily shows was censored so it could be shown on Channel 4 here in the UK, like they actually had to censor scenes of the Prime Minister talking at the dispatch box. Stewart then did another episode like asking about it. Apparently his quote was, why the People's Parliament, the most basic expression of British democracy, is too fragile to withstand a gentle parody, a good-natured kick to the clotted creams. But, if people like Jon Stewart are putting them under the spotlight and they're still not budging, then they're probably not going to budge.
It does just make it feel like, ooh, Parliament, our feelings are so sensitive. You can't make fun of them at all, despite the fact that we are public servants, right? It's like, it's intrinsically laughable.
Maybe we need a new video from the new reborn flame-throwing CGP Grey.
No, don't drag me into this. Don't drag me into this.
After you finish torching the Fine Brothers, maybe it's time to turn that laser focus to the British Parliament. See if you can shame them into a back down.
I'll see if I can get divinely inspired for that voice again. This episode of Hello Internet is brought to you by Harry's. Go to harrys.com and use the promo code HI to save $5 off your first purchase. Harry's offers high-quality razors and blades for a fraction of the price of the big brands. Harry's was started by two guys who wanted a better product without paying an arm and a leg, so they make their own blades in their own factory. These are high-quality, high-performing German razor blades crafted by shaving experts. This gives you a better shave that respects your face and your wallet. Now, Harry's blades are about half the price of the usual brands that you're going to find in a store. Plus, you don't have to go to the store. You don't have to wait around for some guy to unlock the anti-shoplifting case. They just ship directly to your house. No outdoors required. That's just the best. The starter set is an amazing deal. For $15, you get a razor, moisturizing shave cream or gel, and 3 razor blades. When you need more blades, they're just $2 each or less. With Harry's, you get the convenience and ease of ordering online. You get high-quality blades sent to you in great packaging with nice, classy designs. You get the shaving cream, and you get their excellent customer service at half the price of the big brands. So get started today with a set that includes a handle, 3 blades, and shaving cream for just $15 shipped to your door. Go to harrys.com and use the promo code HI to get $5 off your first purchase. Thanks to Harry's for supporting the show.
So, Gray, is it time? Is it finally time?
I guess we'll do. You know what I feel like? Okay, people, he's bringing up guns, germs, and steel, right? That's why Brady's poking at me here. I have this feeling like I'm in school again, and there's some assignment that I'm supposed to do, and it's really late. I keep going, I'll hand it in next week. But then at the same time, when you don't hand it in every week, there's some expectation that it's going to be something really good that you're handing in. But now I feel like, okay, fine. I'm just going to hand in this homework assignment, and it's just going to be over. And we're just going to do this. So we're going to talk about guns, germs, and steel. But it's not going to be long, people. It's not going to be long. We're just going to go over a few things, and then it's going to be done. Then it's going to be over. All
right. So by way of background, if you're new to the podcast, we did an episode recently where we reviewed the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. Gray has made 2 widely viewed videos, which is loosely based on some of the things in the book. We talked in the podcast about some views and opinions about things in the book. And Gray did warn at the time that this was a book full of ideas that divided opinion, and that turned out to be true. And looking at the subreddit dedicated to our discussion, it certainly attracted many opinions, many long detailed comments arguing for and against various positions. I have to say, because I hadn't finished the book and don't feel particularly passionate about it, I kind of dodged this bullet.
Yeah.
And it has mainly been Gray's opinions who've been coming in for scrutiny. And so we've been thinking, do we address some of these? Does Gray answer back to some of them? And now's your chance, Gray. Of the million things that were said, are there any that you wish to address or speak back to?
Okay, so this to me is, again, just like the first conversation, it's a little bit hard to know even where to start because there's just so many particular things that people want to argue over. And I always find the particulars just exhausting. And again, I'll put some links in the show notes later. But again, you will see in some of the conversations that I have had, I am often saying how I agree with these constraints. And it brings me back to this thing that I said at the very beginning, which is that I find the conversation around guns, germs, and steel, the reason that it creates a big argument, almost much more interesting than the particulars of the argument itself. It's like it causes this division, and I have just been increasingly interested in the way conversations on the internet unfold. And I think this is just, to me, a perfect example of a thing that I have seen many times where people are talking past each other, and it's very hard to get at the root of what is the fundamental disagreement. And so like with the last video that I just put up, which was the America Pox Part 2. Right? Some people want to argue about, like, were these animals really easier to domesticate than these animals? Like, how do we know? We can't know unless we go back in time, right? Like, you want to get into the specifics of it. And I'm always interested in the much more higher level argument. Like, I don't really care if Jared Diamond got some detail about ancient llamas and their breeding seasons correct. Like, it doesn't interest me. I am interested in the bigger picture of, were there easier animals to domesticate in some places than others? Were they randomly distributed across the earth? If so, that's an interesting phenomenon. Like, I just don't care about the details of this exact animal and if Jared Diamond got it right or not. And that infuriates some people, but I always just want to reiterate at this point, like, don't forget this part, internet. I am always willing to just grant the historians that they are correct and that Jared Diamond is wrong on the particulars. Just grant it. It doesn't mean that I'm not, like, I don't care what is right. I'm just saying that I think there is this bigger picture to draw from the book that is separate from, like, Jared Diamond and who he is and what exactly he gets right and what exactly he misses. Like, I just think there's this bigger picture to be drawn from it.
I've been thinking a little bit about why incites. Well, I haven't been thinking about it. I've just been thinking about it while you've been talking for the last minute.
That's fine.
So that counts. That counts as thinking about it. I've been trying to think about why it incites so much passion. And I mean, the obvious thing to think is that it incites passion because people feel there's something racial going on here because of, this book is about why continent X, dominated over continent Y. And I can see how people would associate that with race, but it doesn't really seem like race is much of an issue in the book, and he always emphasizes that it's not. I think it must be more like nationalistic. People just feel like a bit of pride in their country and don't like to hear things about where they're from belittled. And I can give you a really good example of that, because this is something I always feel when we talked about guns, germs, and steel. And I realize how ridiculous this is. Like, it's double ridiculous. But I remember when reading about and when you talked about why Australia was a country that was never going to, or had very, very little chance of becoming the source of dominance, and it was never going to be Australians who took over the world. And I remember every time I heard that, feeling like a little bit of resentment and like patriotism and thinking, that's not true, Australia's awesome, and we Australians can do anything. Completely ignoring the fact I am a white European who actually my team did win.
Yeah.
Like, it was the white Europeans who came and took over Australia. And still, when people talk down about Australia and say it hasn't got the resources and it couldn't have taken over, I'm thinking, yeah, we could. Australians are awesome.
Right. Like, but who's the we in that sentence?
Exactly. And that disconnect and that lack of ability to look at the bigger picture, even in the back of my brain when I know it's ridiculous, I think that's what's going on. I think people take things in the book personally, when really this is just stuff that happened a long, long time ago. It had nothing to do with any of us, really. And it's just an interesting discussion in how we ended up where we did. But I don't think a lot of it is massively relevant anymore. Maybe it is, and some people think it is. But I think this is kind of it's an interesting history to find out how we got here. But to me, it's not that many steps removed from how did the solar system form. Like, I'd love to know, how did the universe start? I'd love to know, but it doesn't make a difference to when I go and get my hair cut tomorrow.
Right.
And
right.
I think the world has gotten to a point now where how come country X dominated over country Y, or continent X dominated country Y 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, however many thousand years ago, it feels like it doesn't matter much anymore.
Yeah, this is part of the conversation we didn't get to in our first discussion of Guns, Germs, and Steel. But I completely agree that one of the things about Guns, Germs, and Steel that I find frustrating when people are arguing against it is that they bring it into a modern context. And I think that this is a theory that applies up to the moment that you have civilizations from different continents meeting each other. But at that moment, like, Guns, Germs, and Steel suddenly becomes very irrelevant, right? It's just a question of what is more likely to get you a civilization that can cross oceans. But once you have people crossing oceans and you have transcontinental trade routes, then the geography of the people matters much less. Like, it's a dial that gets turned down over time. That I think geography matters much more in the beginning, when every single advantage that you can possibly get really matters, because it's going to compound over time. But then once the whole world is connected, this doesn't have such an effect anymore. So yeah, I agree. I don't think it's relevant at all to modern times, which is partly why I said last time in the discussion, like, when you asked, does it matter if this is right or wrong? And my answer is, like, in a modern world, no, it doesn't matter, right? Because if it's right, it doesn't have any predictive power for the next 100 years.
But I think people still feel like you're dissing their continent, like I felt about Australia, even though it's not my continent, even though I'm the European guy.
Yeah, but I'm the American here, right?
And I think that's what people think. They feel like you're dissing their animals, or you're dissing their continent and saying that their continent wasn't good enough. And
your marsupials are shit, man. They're shit.
Yeah. You can't even tame a kangaroo.
Yeah, even if you could tame a kangaroo, is it going to pull a plow? No, because it's worthless. Worthless kangaroos.
I know, and I'm like, Australia's awesome. Oh well.
I'm not actually super sure how much it is that people get defensive about their own contents. That never occurred to me before, because I don't have that feeling at all. It never would have occurred to me to feel defensive about North and South America being terrible continents either. But anyway, a couple of the points that I do just want to touch on really quickly is that I will put the links in the show notes. There is a long conversation between me and another Reddit user. Milosh is his Reddit name. I think this is probably a great example for anybody who really wants to dig into the details of me having an argument with someone else. And this argument follows what I feel like is a very well-worn pattern for arguments that I have had about this book with many people from many different backgrounds. There is some back and forth here, but what I think is the interesting thing is that I'm trying to get at what I think is this fundamental difference. Like, do people think that there is any predictability in history pre-transcontinental civilizations or not? And many historians seem to take the position that there isn't any predictability. And it's interesting because they will immediately go to free will and they'll say, oh, you're disregarding the notion of free will. Now, again, on the record here, I don't believe in free will. I think it is a fairy tale that people tell themselves. But in the context of a discussion of history, I'm always happy, like, look, let's not argue about free will because we'll be here for forever. I will just happily grant to you that free will exists, and let's take the whole conversation forward from there. But so many historians are of the view that because free will exists, you can't make these generalizations that Guns, Germs, and Steel wants to make, that Eurasia was more likely than other places to take over the world. And I think that you can make those generalizations even if free will exists. And I think that that is at bottom level, like the fundamental disagreement that is taking place here. And trying to read through the many different threads of people who've been arguing about this and people who've written some articles about this. Like, yes, everyone, I have read all of the articles. I have read just about everything about this. I think like that is the bottom root level of this, is like a question of human agency. And my view is, even if we grant the existence of free will and human agency, that humans are allowed to make their own decisions,
Yeah.
that it seems crazy to me that some people will argue against the idea that human decisions are constrained by environments. That you cannot, like, so there's an example that I'm always trying to use, and I think the conversation I'm going to link to is a good example of what kind of happens, where I want someone to answer a very specific question that I have. So here is this thing that I wrote in the discussion, right? I said, do you agree with what I view as the counterclaim? So like, do you agree with like my portrayal of your argument that all continents are equally as likely to produce empire building civilizations? Like, that seems to be the counter argument. If you are saying that there's no predictability, you are saying that someone living in the Aboriginal desert, right, or in Antarctic ice sheets, that those people are just as likely to be able to come up with empires as someone else. And it is so interesting to me that in all of these conversations, no matter how many back and forths I have, I can never get someone to directly answer that question. All I will ever get back is people saying, "Oh, you can't do a historical what if. Historical what if questions are meaningless, so we can't have this discussion. That's not a thing that we can say." Or they'll say, "Oh, you are trying to make a statistical argument, but we only have a sample size of one Earth, so we can't make any statistical arguments." And this is the back and forth that happens, where I feel like, okay, we here at this disagreement is our fundamental level, and it is crazy making to me, because I feel like, for the love of God, right? Like, if you have a tribe of people living 10,000 years ago at what will be Dead Horse, Alaska, at the very northern part of that state, there's no way that those people are going to be able to build an empire like civilization. There's just nothing there for them. Like, they're not going to have agriculture. They're not going to be able to develop advanced technology. They're not going to conquer the world. It just seems to me like you can't argue against that. And if you, historian, will grant me this one case that people living on a sheet of ice are slightly, like even ever so slightly, less likely to take over the world, then you have granted what I see as the only thing I need to make the rest of this argument. There is some statistical money-balling of history that you can do on a grand scale over long periods of time. But I'm trying very hard here not to misrepresent the other side, but this is the argument that I come up against, where people will not grant that. Or they will just avoid answering that one part of it. And that is what I think is the fundamental disagreement.
Well, yeah, it's because they know how much ammunition they'll be giving you if they answer it honestly.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes I feel like there's like a bizarre, I don't know how to put this, but like I feel like they don't want to address this for for some other reason. Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned the race stuff before, because as well, when these conversations happen, inevitably Again, I've had many of these arguments, many times not under my own name on the internet, which is why I love anonymity on the internet. It's like I could be CGP Grey and argue on some random forum about guns, germs, and steel. Like nobody knows it's me.
Now everyone's going to be seeing CGP grade ghosts on every single forum about it.
You never know. You never know if it's me. But so this one thing comes up all the time, which is that the person that I'm arguing against, when I feel like we're digging down to this moment where I'm saying, like, do you think Aborigines are as likely to take over the world? Nothing to do with them being Aborigines, but doing to the fact that they were in the middle of a desert, right, with terrible animals and no resources accessible at 10,000 years ago BC level technologies. Then there comes a moment where someone is saying something like, why are you measuring success as people taking over the world? And so this exact thing happened in this conversation where the person I'm arguing against says, why is conquering the world the measure of a historical success? Like, shouldn't we be impressed with how people are able to live in incredibly difficult circumstances in various parts of the world? And it's like, that to me seems like I don't think you're intentionally diverting the conversation, but I think this is like mimetic evolution. This is a thing that comes up all of the time because it ends up turning the conversation into something else, where it's like,
I mean, that's not what the book's about. That's why I'm not discussing that.
Yeah,
the book's not about 10,000 years ago who was the happiest.
Yeah.
The book's about, or most successful. It was about who went and took over the place and killed other people.
That is precisely how I feel. But there's like this weird thing where the conversations do get derailed in this way where someone else is like, why are you saying Europeans are so great? And it's like, that is the reverse of the conversation that we're having. Like, we're having the exact opposite conversation. And I will refuse to be drawn into this because, again, I don't think it's a diversion, but I think like this is just an evolution of how these conversations go. Like, I think there's a meme inside your head and my head that's having some other argument, and it's taking this little moment to like blossom into the world by jumping into the conversations.
Deep stuff, Gray. You think about this pretty deeply, don't you?
Well, again, I just really think that this encapsulates a kind of thing that I see in lots of other arguments, because the other point here is that it is very interesting to see, in particularly the Bad History subreddit, when people start talking about my argument, and again, I'll link to other threads about this, but it is this idea of the infuriating totems that I mentioned in the "this video will make you angry" thing, where it has been very interesting over the past few weeks to see how things that I have said on the podcast have mutated into the most infuriating versions of themselves that they could possibly be. And so for two examples, people represent my argument as absolute determinism. That I am saying that if you knew enough about the world, you could predict everything that was going to happen throughout all of history. And it's like, I'm not making that argument. Jared Diamond's not making that argument. Nobody's making that argument. Like, that's a crazy argument to make. That is the argument that people want to argue against. And it is also just infuriating, right? Like, it's incredibly wrong. And then the other one that I think has been very, very interesting to see has actually come out of this podcast. So when we discussed Guns, Germs, and Steel last time, I made the remark at the end about how I overly endorsed Guns, Germs, and Steel as the history book to rule all history books at the end as a way to like troll people who were clearly going to be getting irritated by the video as they were watching it all the way through the end. And that would be like the final capper that would set them off. But that has turned into, and I've tried to fight against it, but I know like this is just a losing battle. I have seen people say, CGP Grey doesn't believe anything in Guns, Germs, and Steel. And he made that whole video just to piss off historians.
Right.
This isn't about me. Like, this isn't just, I'm saying this is an interesting pattern that I see in the world that happens with conversations, right? Where suddenly people are arguing against like this infuriating totem version of me. It's like, boy, I would hate that guy too, right? Like, if someone who had built a career as a person who is making educational videos then intentionally made something that was false just to screw around with a community that he doesn't like so much, like, wow, what a dick that guy would be, right? Like, I would totally agree with that. So the thing that I want to mention here, which is like the broader point, is especially after having done this podcast and seeing this happen to myself, like with conversations like language that we discussed a long time ago and a bunch of other things. Basically, I have come to the point, and I think everyone should keep this in mind, that if you have only heard about another person's opinions from someone who doesn't like that person, you need to be extremely suspicious of that.
Yes, that is true.
But I think it's less obvious than you think it is.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's less obvious than you think it is. And
Yeah.
I have definitely found a bunch of very interesting cases where, like, I have intentionally done a thing over the past year, much more than I ever used to, which is when I keep hearing about how awful someone is, I'm like, oh, let me go actually try to figure out a little bit about their viewpoint on topic X or whatever it is. Sometimes they're still just awful people, but many times I had been surprised and go, oh, okay, wow, like this person I thought was awful. I thought it because I wasn't even aware of it, but I had only ever heard of their views in these like vastly distorted ways.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. I thought that this person, this imaginary totemic version of this person, was absolutely awful, but it's like it is just this cartoonish version of their actual views. Like, and that is really interesting to see firsthand. And again, like the guns, germs, and steel thing, like, again, I'm not trying to dismiss all arguments against it as this totemic thing. There's plenty to criticize legitimately. I just think this is, to me, an interesting example of this phenomenon in action. And it's very interesting for it to be happening to myself over a topic that, again, as we said at the beginning, like, it doesn't really matter that much if guns, germs, and steel is right or wrong. So like, this is all like a fun intellectual game in some ways, which I'm sure someone will take out of context. But it's just, I think it's very interesting to see how conversations unfold. And if you really, really want to see a back and forth in more detail with many thousands of words, I will link to a couple of things in the show notes for you to go take a look at for conversations.
You have this great interest in arguments and debate and the spread of hate and all this sort of stuff. You know, you've made a video about it and you've been talking about it now. It's like it interests you a lot intellectually, no matter what the debate is about. And I sometimes wonder whether or not that comes from just who you are and what your mind is like, or it comes from the fact that I feel like you have a very internety existence. You know, you have this sort of very Reddity and internet existence, and that is kind of the hotbed for this kind of place. This is where this stuff is at its most overt and wild. And I wonder whether that feeds into that and has made you more interested in it, or you're just naturally into that sort of stuff because, you know, you're a guy who likes debating and intellectual discourse, or whether or not you spend so much time on Reddit and watch so much people throwing crap at each other that you now have become very interested in the process of crap throwing.
Yeah, well, the internet definitely takes crap throwing to 11, right? Like there's no disagreement with that. And I think that the internet has an effect of magnifying certain features of arguments so that they are more obvious, right? It's more clear. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure when this started, but I mean, I can definitely say that one of the most interesting things that comes out of seeing a lot of arguments on the internet is this recognizing of patterns, right? And recognizing how, oh, this conversation is like, these participants think that they're having this conversation, but actually they are an instantiation of this pattern that occurs all the time. Looking at it like a level above like that, it becomes, I don't know, it becomes different than seeing two people having an argument. It becomes, I'm seeing this pattern spread through the world. And I think one of the best ways to do this is actually like a Reddit like Change My View, which has a lot of people just arguing and debating about whatever. Pick a topic on there, like look at what people are discussing, and pick something that you just don't have any interest in, that you haven't decided what side you're on. And when you watch people argue a thing that you are not a part of, it becomes much more clear, like, oh, there's some kind of meta structure here. There's something that is not specific to this argument that is still happening. And that is where it is most clear, where you can see this thing where people argue past each other. when you don't have a dog in the fight, it becomes much more obvious when, like, oh, person on side A, you're arguing against an imaginary version of person on side B, and person on side B, you're doing the same thing. Like, you two are not actually arguing against each other. Right? Or you can have the case where, which I feel is a bit like the guns, germs, and steel thing, where it's like, I am a person who is conceding 99% of the ground in this argument, but the other person constantly thinks that we have much more of a disagreement than we actually do. And it's, I think, basically, long story short, I think you're right. I think that being on the internet and being a very internet-y person magnifies a certain interest that I have in this already. And it's definitely something that has been growing over the past year. Argue about it in the comments, people.
If you lost all your episodes of Hello Internet from your computer tomorrow, well, that'd be okay. You could download them again from the Hello Internet website or perhaps somewhere like iTunes. But what if all your personal data disappeared tomorrow? Your photos, private information, that novel you've been working on for the last 8 years. Where would you go? What would you do? Maybe, and I stress maybe, you remembered to back them up to external hard drive. But that was 6 months ago now, wasn't it? Or was it 8 months ago? When did you last back that up? Or maybe the burglars who took your computer also took your hard drives. Now what? Well, never fear, Backblaze is here. And because you signed up for Backblaze, your computer was silently backing up all your files every day to the Backblaze servers. And there it sits safely along with the 150 petabytes of other data backed up by people who were just as smart as you. So now you can simply download it all back to your new computer, or you can contact Backblaze and they'll physically post you a hard drive with all the data on it. Crisis averted. Now Backblaze isn't just great for these major catastrophes. You can also retrieve single files with just a few clicks. You can even get at your files from a really cool app on your phone. This is a super service. I use it myself really happily and I recommend it to you all. Backblaze was founded by ex-Apple engineers and it will run natively on your Mac and or your PC. It's just $5 a month for that incredible peace of mind. You get unlimited, unthrottled backup. If you'd like to give them a try, go to backblaze.com/hellointernet. There you can go on for a risk-free, no credit card required trial. I think once you've seen it in action, it'll probably sell you on the whole thing. That address again, backblaze.com/hellointernet. The /hellointernet will let them know you came from here on the podcast. And as always, our thanks to Backblaze for supporting the show. So as we record, what I should be doing right now is packing.
Didn't this happen before when you were supposed to be packing, but somehow we're recording a show with me instead?
I am going on a holiday, briefly to India.
Oh.
And then the main body of the holiday is in Bhutan, which is a place I have never been to before, and I'm very excited about visiting.
Bhutan.
Yeah, great. Click, 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 click. You must vaguely know where it is. You always get it vaguely right.
I feel like Bhutan's near Indonesia?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Problem is, I know they have the dragon flag. Like, that's the thing that leaps into my head, but I have nowhere idea in the world. Oh, I'm confusing them with, I'm confusing it with Brunei. That's what I'm thinking of. Sorry, entire nations of Brunei and Bhutan. Sorry to all the Tim and Timonethas who live there.
I can't speak for Brunei, but I would be very surprised if we have many listeners in Bhutan. It's a bit of a forbidden kingdom, and technology has only sort of just started coming to it. So,
what are you talking about? What do you mean technology's only just started coming to it? What kind of apocalypse has happened there?
No, it's just one of these really sort of, forbidden, sheltered places. It has this reputation for that. So,
what do you mean by the word forbidden?
You always hear the word forbidden used when people talk about Bhutan because they don't let many people in and things like that. It's like a forbidden kingdom.
The word forbidden shows up once on their Wikipedia page, saying that proselytism is forbidden by a royal government decision in Bhutan.
Well, there you go.
I don't think that's backing up your case. One match for forbidden. Nope.
They're famous for forbidding that.
Forbidding proselytism.
Here we go. Here's a blog. Here's a Wall Street Journal blog where they say Forbidden Kingdom opens up a little bit. Like, oh, I don't care what you say. I'm calling it forbidden because it sounds awesome.
I'm sorry, Brady. I didn't mean to try to take away your Forbidden Kingdom that you're going to visit. the mystery of the East.
And one of the things that really got me interested in going there is a mountain there, which is the highest mountain in the world that has not been summited. And I can't say it. It's like Ganga Punsam.
Are you going to summit that mountain, Brady?
I'm not going to summit it. I just want to see it.
Oh, that's much less interesting.
Obviously, I'm not going to summit
Why,
it because
obviously? Haven't you been up Mount Everest? Haven't you gone there?
do you know why Ganga Punsam has not been summited, Gray?
Obviously not.
I'll tell you why. Because it's forbidden.
It is not.
You are not allowed to climb it. The government of Bhutan has banned the climbing of mountains over 6,000 meters, and Ganga Punsam is 7,570 meters high, which is very high. So that's not allowed to be climbed. It is a forbidden mountain.
I would say it's prohibited.
That too. But the prohibited kingdom doesn't sound quite as good as the forbidden kingdom.
Not even close, no.
So depending on the weather, I hope to catch a glimpse of that mountain from a distance. Mm-hmm. Otherwise the clouds may forbid my viewing of it as well.
They may block your viewing of it.
So I'm hoping to get a look at it, and I'm really looking forward to Bhutan. I will report back to the Hello Internet Nation upon my return. But going there does involve me going to India twice. I have to stop in India on the way, and we're going to go and see the Taj Mahal because no other of us have ever seen it. Mm-hmm. And then we have to stay in India when we come back. And this brings me to one of my favorite topics, Indian visas.
Yes, I hear that the Indian government's bureaucracy is amazing.
Well, last time I went to India, I had a real moan on the podcast because I had to go all the way to Birmingham, which is a city a few hours from where I am, and fill out all these forms in person. And since then, India has introduced this electronic visa system. And everyone tweeted me and emailed me and said, "Oh, Brady, do you know this has come in? You know, what do you think about it?" And I couldn't tell people what I thought about it because I hadn't done it. I have now done it. And I have to take my hat off to the Indian government. I didn't think it would be possible to replicate the terrible, terrible, terrible experience of visa application in person in the online format. But they've done it.
Oh, really?
They have managed to transfer the heartache, disappointment, and impossibility of their visa system very effectively onto the internet.
That sounds amazing. The only thing that's leaping into my head is on my list of games to play is a game called Papers, Please. And it is a game where you just look through documents as a government employee. Like, it is a paperwork replicator. And so I like this idea that someone in the Indian government is like, it's really terrible to apply to our visas in person. How can we capture the feeling of that and put it onto the internet?
They have captured the feeling. And you should add to your list of games to play applying for an Indian visa, just for the fun of it.
That would be the only reason to go to India.
I'm going to ignore just the bad design and unintuitive layout and just the general unpleasantness of that, because that's a matter of taste, and maybe culturally Indian web pages are different, and I need to deal with that. I don't know.
I don't think so, but okay, sure, go ahead.
But having sort of arbitrary red asterisks next to the things that have to be filled out and not filled out, and then changing your mind and saying you've got to go and fill that out even though it didn't have an asterisk, like whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure that's just a cultural difference.
But the level of detail they want to go to this country continues to amaze me. Mm-hmm. And okay, I guess I was able to recollect the intimate birth details of my parents eventually. Then being asked to list every city I've ever been to in India is, when I've been there a few times now, it's not easy. Being asked the visa number and the address of the last place I stayed in when I was in India was also quite a challenge, digging up that information. But my favourite was being required to list all the countries I have visited in the last 10 years.
No.
I know I'm an old guy, so I travel a bit now. But that's a long list, and I can't do it.
I travel as little as possible, but I would have a hell of a hard time coming up with all of the places I have been in the last 10 years. I was just at the bank the other day, actually having quite a good bureaucratic experience for once. But they needed to know the address of the house I lived in 2 houses ago.
Oh, I can't do that either.
Now, this is within the past 5 years. And it was like, I got nothing, right? There's nothing in my head about this. Like, can you give us the first letter of the postcode? No, I have no idea.
I text my wife whenever that happens. I'll be in a bank saying, "What was the address of that place we lived in Nottingham? That third place?" Like, she's amazing for that, but I got no idea. So anyway, an excruciating amount of detail was required. Now, I understand they're pretty delicate about people that have connections with Pakistan. And if they just said, "Have you ever been to Pakistan?" or "Have you got any relatives who are from Pakistan?" I would understand. There are issues there.
Uh-huh.
But this was an ordeal, and it was worsened by the fact I had to apply for me, and I volunteered to do my wife's as well, so I had to go through it twice. But no, I didn't have to go through it twice. Because here's the other catch: you can only do one entry, and we are going into India on the way to Bhutan, and then we're coming into India again on the way back, like a week and a half later. That requires a whole separate visa, and you have to go through the whole multi-page website again and do the whole thing again. But also, you can only do it in this kind of window 1 month out from when you go. So I filled out the form, not knowing I was going to have this problem of having to do it twice. I filled out the form, filled out the thing, went through the whole separate thing you have to then do to pay the $60 to some other bank, which never works and takes about 8 goes to make work over a series of days. But then I found out, okay, you've got your visa, but that's only going to get you in once. You now have to wait for the other window to open for your other visa to go into India when you're coming back. They make it so hard to get into that country.
I'm pulling up a map here, right?
Hmm.
Why are you going to India? Like, you're just stopping over on your way to Bhutan, right? Why don't you just give India the middle finger and just stop in Pakistan? Get a connecting flight in Pakistan, right? For Rizlabad or something. I don't know.
I've never been to Pakistan, and I can imagine applying for visas there is probably also not the world's easiest experience.
Okay, well, fine. Well, then next over it's Afghanistan, right? I'm sure it's going to be easy, right? To get a connecting flight into Kabul, right? Look, I'm trying to help you here. Okay, fine. Let's go. We'll go a little bit more west. We can get a connecting flight out of Iran. Does that work for you? Can you get a connecting flight out of Iran?
This is not an easy part of the world to travel to, is it? But I have to say, my wife loves India, and we both want to see the Taj Mahal. So that is why we're going. And I'm sure it will be lovely, and all of these problems with the visa will be long forgotten.
Will they, though? I feel like this kind of stuff sticks in your craw for a long time.
I have had problems with visas every time I've ever gone to India. Mm-hmm. And some of them have involved mercy missions in the middle of the night to go and get some guy to unlock the embassy for me to sign some document.
Well, like, on my long list of reasons never to go to India, this is just another one.
Don't say that, because we have lots of listeners in India, and they're really good at emailing.
I'm sure they are good at emailing. Like, sorry, India, I'm never going to your country. Like, I have no interest in going. Your visa sounds like a real pain in the butt. I swear, like, if I had some even mild interest into going to India, and I loaded up a visa page and I could see at the bottom of the page it said, click next for page 2, that would be enough to totally defeat me. I'd be like, forget it. I'm not going to India. It's not going to happen.
I mean, you know me, Gray. I'm always trying to get you to go places and do things that I've done, because that's just what I do. Like, right. I'm always trying to get you to go to Nepal, but I'm not selling you on India yet. I'm yet to see or experience something.
Is that after the Nepal experience?
It's just
when we get our connecting flight through let's see. Yeah, we get our connecting flight through Baghdad to Nepal.
Nepal's easy to get into. The forbidden kingdom of Bhutan, I can't tell you, because the travel agent had to do those visas. It is so forbidden that I couldn't even do the visa application. That's how forbidden it is. I didn't even know what was involved. I don't know whether there were paper bags exchanged in the dead of night or mysterious magic words have to be spoken, but I don't even know what it was required. I've just got it.
Or bribes paid. Bribes paid, that's the thing. But yeah, so I'm not going to India, and email Brady. Sometimes I defend bureaucracies because I think bureaucracies have a bad rap. My favorite experience with the bureaucracy ever was when I was getting qualified to be a teacher here in the UK. I am a foreigner. I'm an immigrant in the UK. And so at one point, I was talking with my advisor, and she was telling me, we have to get you certified that you can speak English. Okay, I am talking to you right now, is this not good enough? And she goes, no, everyone who is from outside the UK, you have to bring to me a piece of paper that says that you are fluent in English. And so I had to book an exam to go to this building to take a test to prove that I could speak English. And what did I think was going to happen? I thought I'm going to get into like a room with some dude, and it's like, oh, ha ha ha, we'll have a fun chuckle over this, won't we? Right? Like, can the Americans speak English? Who knows? Nope. No. The only way that the test to see if I was conversant in English enough to teach in a UK school was entirely an on-screen computer test that was multiple choice. I had to sit there for like an hour answering a bunch of questions in English. And then they gave me a piece of paper which said, congratulations, you passed. You can, quote, speak English. And then I gave my advisor back at the university that piece of paper. And in front of me, she could tick a little box on her form that said, yes, this person speaks English.
Gray, that sounds like your dream come true. You didn't have to interact with a person, just a screen. Like I would have thought you'd be quite grateful for that.
I lost a whole afternoon of my life, Brady. A whole afternoon of my life. Never gotten back. I couldn't retrieve that afternoon. But that to me was like the apex of what a bureaucracy was. Because it wasn't even that like, oh, my advisor then has to pass off this piece of paper to someone else who doesn't know me. It's like, no, just within her system, she's not going to tick this box until she has the piece of paper, even though she knows that I speak English. Like, can you just pretend that you have the piece of paper? Is anyone ever going to check this? No. We've got to crank the gears of the machine, dehumanizing us all.
What sort of questions were you asked? Do you remember much about the test?
I don't remember anything about it, except a vague feeling of being slightly nervous, like I was going to actually fail this test about can I speak English.
Did you have to speak answers, or would you just touch a screen like it would be which one of these words is cloud or something? Or did you have to say things?
I could have been totally mute. There was nobody there. I didn't have to speak anything. I was just clicking buttons on a screen.
So to prove that you can speak English, you didn't actually have to speak. You could have had no tongue and passed that test.
That's entirely correct, yes. It was only mildly less frustrating than the test I also had to take to prove that I could do grade school math. My bachelor's in physics was apparently not accepted by the university either. That was not okay. Even though I was also accepted into their program to become a physics teacher, no, I also, as a foreigner, had to take a test that proved that I could do multiplication up to and including numbers as large as 12.
Do you know what I want to see? I want to see the process you have to go through to become a school teacher in India.
Please list your class schedule for all schools you have been to for the past 20 years. Have you not weighed yourself, Brady?
No.
Okay, man. So, I let you slide last week, but I think I need to have, a friend intervention here, because how long has it been since you weighed yourself? 6 months now? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you could do an intervention. I feel like maybe I need to do an intervention on you and realize, I feel like saying to you, he's just not that into it. Just let me, if you truly love a bi-weekly weigh-in, you let it go. And if it returns to you, it was truly yours. So you've got to let me go. And if I start weighing myself again, then I'm truly yours.
See, here's the thing, Brady.
Yep.
I know this about you, right? It is the very fact that I am putting this bi-weekly weigh-in in here, and that I'm trying to bring it up again, and I'm trying to put you on the hook again. I think that you being on the hook for your health, I think this is a good thing for you. I want you on the hook.
But if you truly knew me, you would know making me do a rigid thing every 2 weeks is not how I work.
I don't care if it's exactly every 2 weeks. Like whatever. I just don't want to let you try to have this just slide away like you have been doing from the very beginning since we ever started this. Right?
Right.
It's always like
you've got to let me free.
It away.
You've got to let me go free.
But see, when you say that, all I hear is that you just want to drink your Diet Pepsi's unmolested. That's what you want to do.
Diet Pepsis are good. They've got no calories. The thing is, I've got to want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it because you want me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to come from within.
Well, of course. How do we get you to want to do it from within? How do we inspire you, Brady?
I don't know, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. So what are these points you want to cover?
The reason why I was brought up the bi-weekly weigh-in this week is I thought, and I just let it slide last week because I knew last week I wasn't even going to try.
I mean, I don't mind the bi-weekly weigh-in, but to me it's not a bi-weekly weigh-in. It's like Health Corner.
Right.
But we call it bi-weekly weigh-in because it's a funny name.
Like a meta joke now, right? It's bi-weekly weigh-in.
Although it does pose the question, the elephant in the room is bi-weekly, twice a week, or fortnightly?
We're not getting distracted, right? That's mimetic warfare right there. We're getting distracted.
Yeah, you think Guns, Germs, and Steel's controversial. You tried talking about whether something's bi-weekly or fortnightly.
So here's why I thought this would be a nice, gentle point of re-entry for the bi-weekly weigh-in. Because last time I was very happy to be under 200 pounds. But this time I am back over 200 pounds entirely through my own actions and my own fault. I weighed myself this morning and I am 201 pounds. My low was 198, so I am up 3 pounds from my bottoming out there. But so I thought this is a great time to again just reiterate my fundamental idea here that it's not about succeeding every single time, that the skill is about getting back on the wagon and about being able to constantly recommit yourself to the thing that you are trying to achieve. And so when I saw that I was over 200 pounds, I was A, not entirely surprised for reasons that we will mention shortly. But B, I thought, okay, it's okay. Like, this is not some failure. I was genuinely hoping that after getting back down under 200, I thought, like, I will never be over 200 again. But like that. That to me is exactly the wrong kind of thing to think, though, right? Because then it's like, oh, there's only one way to fail here. Whereas the correct way to think about this stuff is like, no, you just you didn't follow the system and now you just need to get back on with the system. So that's the point here. I thought it would be an excellent time to bring you back on board, but maybe not so much.
I mean, what you say is true, Gray, and it's motivating to hear it. So you are doing me good by saying it.
I'm a motivational speaker.
I tell you what, a lot of people have taken inspiration from, and like, I'm not saying people should do this, but I've found it really touching how many people have really started health kicks because of those T-shirts you thought of. Mm-hmm. The Fittertron T-shirts. So many people have like posted pictures or sent emails saying, "I've got one, and it's just made me decide to get really healthy," and they're really they're doing well. I felt a bit that way when I first got it, to be honest. Like, I started wearing it all the time and going for runs, and I've stopped a bit just lately, but it's funny how something so like little and trivial can be the thing that can give you a little kick.
My guess is it's partly the fact that they are people who are listening to the podcast as well, right? Like, the podcast comes out on a somewhat regular basis. So yes, I do like seeing people getting their T-shirts, but the messages that I have seen so far that I definitely like the best are people who have over a longish period of time lost some weight. Like, I will never grow tired of those. And I think maybe just the fact that this T-shirt is also connected to a podcast that they listen to on a regular basis, like, maybe that's just the thing that kind of puts someone over the edge. You know, whatever it is, it's a good thing. But, you know, you're here every 2 weeks. You're here every 2 weeks, Brady.
I'm here every 2 weeks. I'm here bi-weekly.
Yeah, you're here bi-weekly. That's right. That's what you are.
Or am I here fortnightly?
No. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. I will have to confess what my problem is and why I am back over 200 pounds. I will start by saying and having excuses, right? So I was doing animating for the last video that came out. And animating has always been my danger zone because, one, I just don't get any sleep at all, and then 2, I just eat garbage all the time while I'm animating, and 3, I don't move. So it's like 3 solid days of just the worst I could possibly be. I was really proud of myself this time because I didn't stay up all night like I normally do, and so ended up dragging out the animation over many more days. I think it took me 5 days to animate it instead of just the usual 2 or 3. So like, okay, so like baby steps, baby steps. But I still wasn't exercising, and I was also just eating a bunch of garbage. But chief among them was popcorn, which is just that's just a black hole of danger for me. Like, can't get near the popcorn because you will eat all of it in the world, right? Like, there's no amount of popcorn that is satiating.
How can that be bad? I mean, popcorn is just corn, which is healthy because it's like, vegetable-y, and it's air. It's air blown into corn. That sounds like the healthiest food in the world.
Okay, listen, this is going to get a little personal. So many years ago, when I listened to This American Life, before I had to give it up because I just found it too tedious, and yeah, I just couldn't deal with This American Life. But they did an episode which was about people who had food allergies, but that couldn't give up the food. So they'd be people who would they would have something like shrimp that they just totally loved, but they would have horrific allergic reactions to it. So they would just EpiPen themselves while having shrimp, right? Or they would just accept the fact that they were going to be deeply uncomfortable for a long time. And I remember listening to that show and thinking, how can anyone possibly be like that? Like, what are these idiots doing, eating these foods that in some case just totally endanger their lives?
Shrimp and prawns is probably the food that would make me do that too. So it's funny you chose that example. But anyway.
Yeah. So here's a little lesson that I have learned from the low carb diet, which is that under a certain point of carbs, I have discovered that you can basically give yourself allergies to carbs after a long enough period of time. Wow. I first discovered this with milk, which I had a really bad reaction to after not drinking milk for a very long time. But popcorn is the absolute worst. And I haven't discussed it on the podcast before, but I eventually picked up a pattern after, say, going to The Martian and Everest and Star Wars and a couple of movies at home sometimes, and now this last binge of animating, that if I have popcorn in the evening, I better not have to go anywhere the next day. And I'm going to stay real close to the house, as in I'm never going to leave the house.
Popcorn, but it doesn't stop you eating it.
Apparently this is not unusual for people who go on a really low carb diet, and that the shells in popcorn, that they can give you really basically like a horrific internal reaction in your intestines if you go on a really low carb diet. But basically now,
this is being so delicate.
It's like maybe there's no polite way to say it, but it's like, man, it's a bad decision. But nonetheless, I find myself in this situation where now I am one of those idiots who was on This American Life a long time ago, where it's like, I'm looking at a bowl of popcorn and thinking, well, you're not just going to eat one of these. You're going to eat like 3 of these. And then if you have anything scheduled for tomorrow, for the whole day tomorrow, you are just going to have to cancel it, right? And like, yeah, okay, I understand that. And go, right? Like, we're just going right ahead with this. And the following day, while I am in great discomfort and in some cases quite serious pain, I'm still thinking, worth it, right? It was totally worth it. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to pay this price.
Oh, man. I'll tell you what, I think you're the one that needs an intervention, not me.
This episode of Hello Internet is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the simplest way for anyone to create a beautiful landing page, website, or online store. Start building your website today at squarespace.com. With easy-to-use tools and templates, Squarespace helps you capture every detail of what drives you. Squarespace puts all the power you need in your hands and takes away all of the pain points, like worrying about hosting and worrying about bandwidth. I use Squarespace to run my websites, and that right there was the big selling feature for me years ago when I switched. I don't have to worry about paying bandwidth charges on my website anymore. Sold. With Squarespace, you can build a site that looks professionally designed regardless of skill level. No coding required. You can make your website look and feel exactly the way you want with their ability to tweak just about everything. And Squarespace has state-of-the-art technology that powers your site to ensure security and stability. They're trusted by millions of people and some of the most respected brands in the world. Their site templates are stunning to look at, and they all feature responsive design. So your site looks good on a gigantic 27-inch monitor, all the way down to a 4.7-inch phone. There's tons of other features like 24/7 support with live chat and email. They have a commerce platform. They have a cover page feature. There's just so much in there. If you're a developer, you can check out their dev platform to monkey around with the code. It's really everything you could possibly ask for. Squarespace plans start at just $8 a month. So begin your free trial today with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com. And when you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure to use the offer code HI to get 10% off your first purchase and show your support for Hello Internet. Thanks to Squarespace for supporting the show.
I noticed that you were video gaming on Twitch or whatever it's called the other day, and everyone was telling me on Twitter, Brady, why aren't you there watching Gray play video games? Mm-hmm. Which I don't feel like I need to answer that question. But anyway,
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Why didn't you want to watch me play video games, Brady?
I know. I mean, I know it's a huge thing, but it makes me feel so old to say it. But the fact that people sit and watch other people play games for hours is quite the thing. Mm-hmm. But it did make me contact you this week and say we should talk about video games. Well, the first idea I had was I wanted to sort of get my head around why I feel like I've grown out of games, and throw that issue around a bit, because that's the main thing I want to talk about, which I know is interesting in itself. But then as I was thinking about it, I felt like to give it some context, we should probably talk a little bit about our history with games and gaming, like, you know, how it started for us and how we got to the point we're at now. Mm-hmm. And sort of thinking about that over the last few hours today has just got me so excited about the nostalgia of games and my history with games that's what I want to talk about. But I know that's not what you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, your relationship with video games, I have a hard time understanding, and I have been quite surprised by your childlike giddiness as you've been sending me messages about your busy reminiscing over past games. So I'm not like I have a very hard time understanding your relationship with video games at all. So you need to explain to me.
Are we calling them video games? Is that the right term? Is that like what old people call them, or is that okay?
I'm saying video games talking to you. I'm almost certainly just going to slip into games as the conversation goes on.
All right. How do you differentiate between board games and...
This is a whole other conversation. Don't try to move off track here. I just want just try to tell me what your relationship is, because I don't understand at all. Because it seems to me like adult you, this is going to be too strong of a word, but adult you almost has some kind of disdain for games, or like it's a funny thing when video games come up between us, and I just don't know where you stand.
No, that is not a fair characterization. I would say it is more indifference, but an appreciation for how much I used to love it, and a kind of almost a confusion as to why I don't anymore. Like I kind of almost want to get back into them. Like sometimes I see like a couple of the games you're playing, you'll tell me about them, or I see promotions for new games that are out, and I think, that looks really cool. Like, I wish I had that when I was young. I think I'd really enjoy playing that. And yet I cannot get it. I can't get into it. Like, I don't have the desire, and I don't know where it went. I used to love them. And that's why I think I have this cliched view that young people are into games and you grow out of them.
Right.
And I know people are going to say, oh, the statistics show that the average gamer is 35 years old and that sort of stuff. But I actually am not convinced by that. And if it is true, why is it so disconnected with the circles I move in? Does it say something about my friends and the world I move in?
Yeah, it definitely does say something about your friends. Let's just get this out of the way, like, immediately. You, and I know you're going to argue against this, but you are moving in above averagely successful circles. The people that you are talking to are, compared to the average person, much more successful in their fields, right? Not even just financially successful, but just successful in a broad sense.
Right.
And I think that there's definitely going to be an anti-correlation there between someone who is unusually successful and video game playing.
Basically, you're saying a lot of the people I spend time with just haven't got time to play games.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Like if you are
Yeah.
going to be successful in any sense of the word, you need more time than the average person does to do stuff. It's interesting because I in preparation for watching this video, I rewatched your video we mentioned recently, the Professors React to 2048 video, just because I just wanted to kind of bring it fresh in the mind. And I wasn't surprised there that most of the professors, as an example, you could see that they weren't so interested. Notable exception, Professor Moriarty, which I'm not surprised by. But for the large extent, like they just weren't interested in playing the games, or one of them even said like, "Oh, it feels like a waste of my mental efforts to be playing this kind of game." And it's like news at 11, successful chemistry professors not so interested in video games. It seems like obviously this would be anti-correlated.
I think a lot of people won't like hearing that.
Why?
Well, because the flip side of it is saying if you're really into games and like playing games, you're not successful.
That's a kind of weird argument. I'm just simply saying that if you're a successful
That's not.
person...
Hang on a second. I know you say I say some weird things, but that's not a weird thing to say. I'm not saying it's true. I don't think it's true. But it's not a weird thing to say when you just said people who are really successful haven't got time for games. Isn't it a fair leap to make to say, well, if you have got time for games, you must not be as successful? That's not like it could be wrong, but it's not stupid.
No, yeah, so and I wasn't saying it's a stupid argument. I just think it's like basketball players are taller than the population on average. That's not saying that only tall people are basketball players, right? Like that's the converse argument here. If you're talking about successful people, I think you should find that on average, most of their time is spent on the things that make them successful. I think that's what's going on here.
So what was your first experience of games?
I really want to know about your first experience. Where do you start with video games? Because I really don't have any sense of this at all.
I'm a bit older than you. It probably started a bit earlier for me. I was trying to think where it started for me. And the first one I wrote down were those, do you know those handheld Donkey Kong games that Nintendo used to make?
Do you mean the LCD screen games?
Yeah, the 2 LCD screens.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that Donkey Kong, and then I also had Donkey Kong 2 of that. And so I wrote that as the first one. So that's my earliest sort of gaming memories. But the thing I want to say about that, and I found this really interesting, was I had that Donkey Kong game where you could clock the game by getting to 999 points. And I remember spending hours and hours and days and weeks trying to get through that game, and having at one point having a high score of 970 or something, and I choked right before the end, and I was consumed by the game. And then eventually it retired. I got put away in a drawer, and I never played it again, and I moved on. And I remember one time about 5 or 6 years later, getting it out and thinking, for old time's sake, let's put the batteries back in it and have a go. Mm-hmm. And I turned it on and played it. And the first time I played it, I clocked it to the end straight away. Mm-hmm. And I've never fully understood it. Was it because when you're older, you just get better at things? And was I just better and smarter and more? As a little kid, was I just not capable of...
Donkey Kong was beyond you.
Yeah, it was. What is that? It was it a really easy game? And just when I was young, there were certain skills I didn't have, and then when I was a bit older, like a late teenager or something, it was just like child's play. That could be the only explanation, couldn't it?
Okay, well, so for our younger listeners who have no idea what you're talking about, just to set the stage here, because I think this answers your question.
Yeah.
The very first handheld video game consoles of any kind were Game Boy sized things, but they were dedicated to a single game. And there was just a couple of LCD things on the screen that could light up or that would not light up. So if you think of an old fashioned calculator where when you look at the screen, you can see that it can't draw arbitrary shapes. It can only draw the couple of shapes that will then appear as numbers depending on what's illuminated on the screen. Yeah. These games were so simple that they built an entire game out of that concept, where there would be a little picture of a Donkey Kong that could light up or not. And so it could only be in 3 positions, right? And every single place that you could possibly be on the board as a little Mario, the picture would light up or not. And so I think, Brady, these games were so simple that yes,
Yeah.
adult you is just able to perceive it as the full system that it is and just crush it.
Whereas a kid, it was like I was the man moving around, like I got lost in it, and
Right.
therefore. But and maybe because I'd also seen more advanced games by that point, it just seemed, it seemed like from a primitive intelligence to me
Right.
when I was older.
You were just able to perceive it as the system of like, oh, okay, there's only 3 spots that the guy in the bottom can be whenever the barrel's in this location. Like it's not a moving barrel, it's a sequence of lights. Like, even that is over representing what it actually is. So those things were just so simple that you can't compare them to even anything remotely like a modern video game.
I did feel like a god all those years later when I took it out and just got straight to the end.
Yeah.
But
was that after you drove your car?
So, but then the first from there, we were actually, I think my parents were although my parents weren't into games, they did like new gimmicks, I think. So we were quite early adopters when it came to the Atari 2600 console, which we used to plug into our huge wooden Rank Arena TV with its huge, which took 4 people to lift because it was so heavy.
Well, I'm pretty sure the Atari had wood on it as well. That old Atari 2600. There was wood on the front.
Yeah, we did have that. I had that early one. I tell you what, that TV, though, brings back fond memories. It got to a point where whenever you switched it on, you had to wait a good half an hour to 40 minutes until it became bright enough to be able to see things. Mm-hmm. Like if there was a TV, like the tube was so old and my parents didn't replace it, if there was a show on in 40 minutes you wanted to watch, you would turn the TV on now so that the picture would be bright enough by the time the show started.
That's pretty bad.
And we went through this phase where it had this like yellow glow crawling across the screen that we could never figure out. And it turns on, we'd put it too close to like one of the speakers from our sound system.
Magnetic shielding. You have to have magnetic shielding for your speakers. Otherwise, they're going to mess up your cathode ray tube.
I was so into the Atari games. I mean, starting from the really simple ones, like Outlaw was my earliest memory. And basketball with just that square pixel ball and 2 stickmen, literally 2 stickmen that make your videos look like masterpieces.
Right.
Playing basketball. And I tell you what, I was amazing at that game. Mm-hmm. I was amazing at basketball. Then Space Invaders and Defender and Yars Revenge and all that. But I remember when Pole Position came out on the Atari 2600, like that was such a leap in graphics. Like I thought, this is amazing. Like games will never get better than this. And if you Google Atari 2600 Pole Position and watch a YouTube video of it being played, and just think that there was a time when I played that game and I thought, games won't get better than this. Graphics won't get better than this. I can't believe they've done this. It was extraordinary to me.
Yeah, I definitely played some of this. This is that racing game. I was just Googling it because I couldn't remember precisely what it is. But yes.
I thought humanity had peaked with the making of that game and nothing would ever be better.
I mean, just for comparison here, people, right? Like the whole game is 256 pixels by 256 pixels on the screen. Like I'm pretty sure that icons on my Mac are 256 pixels by 256 pixels at this point.
I was wrong because then eventually I got this game called Pitfall 2. Not the original Pitfall. I actually got Pitfall 2 before Pitfall. Mm-hmm. And that game was like Tomb Raider to me. I thought, oh my goodness, it's so complex, it's so incredibly layered, and it's full of depth and adventures to be had. I could spend a lifetime playing this game and never get to the end of it. Mm-hmm. And of course, I watched someone play it on YouTube a bit earlier today, and it was like the simplest thing in the world. It was ridiculous. But at the time, it was this whole world I could get lost in.
How old are you when you're playing this Atari? What's the time frame here?
Well, it's the 80s, so I guess I'm from, either side of 10.
Okay. I'm just trying to establish okay, so this is your early gaming, because this is where you are about 5 years older than me, and my wife is about the same amount of age younger than me. And it's interesting that there are so many things where that age difference doesn't matter. But when you're talking about what were the experiences of 10 or 15-year-old you, it's like, oh, you're from different planets, right? That
Yeah.
it's accelerated, especially for people who are interested in technology. When you rewind and you're going across, like, okay, were you experiencing computing in 1980 or 85 or 90? Like these are light years apart. And going through my own history of gaming, like I had some of the handheld stuff that you did. That's why I know what you're talking about with that Donkey Kong game. And I
Mm.
had a neighbor who had an Atari, so I played some games on there. And I'm sure that definitely helped solidify our friendship. Was like, oh, you have an Atari. We
Yeah.
can play video games. Wow, I'm gonna make sure I always go over to your house.
Yeah.
But for me, like my own personal gaming experience didn't really happen until 1990 when I got a Game Boy. It's like that was the first thing that I owned that was actually a general gaming platform. And
Right.
the difference between something like that and the Atari is just like it puts us at surprisingly far difference in some way for what is the early experience of gaming.
It makes me feel ancient when I think of some of our younger listeners who could look these up now and think, oh my goodness.
Right.
But moving to a computer was a really interesting thing for me. The computer that my mum bought for me was an Amstrad CPC 6128. And the reason she got this was because that was the computer that they used at my school for computer lessons and that I was going to learn on. So she thought it would make sense to have the same computer. I don't know who she bought it from or where she got it, but she bought it from some mysterious computer Jedi, because the one we bought, he had done so many hacks to it and had made so many things, and he'd literally added buttons to it, like actual red buttons that did weird things that computers weren't supposed to do. And my mum bought it with these two massive, massive boxes full of discs and games. Like there must have been 200 maybe discs, and most of them had multiple games. I never got through finding out all the games he had on them, but he also had all this software that did weird things, and he gave us this instructions onto how to use one of these discs to fix your computer when weird things happened. And it was all very strange. My mum had no idea, so it was just me discovering all this stuff as I put in disc after disc and finding new games and new things. But there was this one disc, this one bit of software that was like very powerful and magical. Because I remember one time I had this friend that was really into computers, and he was really into this 6128. And I said to him, oh, you should come around and see mine one day. It's got all these weird things built on it, and I've got all this software that I don't understand. And he came around, and it was like I'd just shown him a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence. Like he couldn't believe what I'd shown him, this powerful, amazing piece of treasure. And I was then banished from the room, and he spent the next 2 days just copying everything and taking all this stuff. So I had countless computer games, and I would some of them I would play for a few months, and other ones I would look at for 10 minutes and never play again. But I was really into games at that point because I had this ridiculous number of them.
The PC gaming thing is where for me it's hard to figure out precisely when this happened. I was trying to look through pictures earlier today to like place my own history with games, but I too know that like I had a variety of computers when I was young. Like I was lucky enough that I was in a family that had that kind of thing, and I also had like I don't even know where they came from. Like, did my dad get them? I have no idea. But there was just tons of floppy disks with the same thing, where like there's a bunch of games on here, or there's just random programs on here that do stuff, and having that computer was just like, wow, this is amazing. There's an infinite world of stuff to explore in this box. Like it's just amazing. And that was some of my first experiences with computer programming of like, wow, there's this system here that I can talk to in this very basic way with computer programming. Or they're just these games that are these machines to interact with. It was all just like very, very horizon broadening for the right kind of person. Like I think a lot of nerds in our broad age demographic had this experience of a computer being just something so fundamentally different from everything else in the world, and just really being, the adults don't know what it is. They just have it. They feel like, oh, our kids need this for the future. but it's just a machine like, oh, here, kid, here is a corner of the world in which you have autonomy, where you can just interact with this virtual world and it will push back against you. And it feels like, okay, you are as good as you can be here or as bad as you can be here. Or like whatever you can figure out, it's entirely you figuring out. And for the right kind of kid, like that is just incredibly rewarding. And I know I was definitely that kind of kid. And I spent every free moment I possibly could on the computer, just playing games or messing around or trying to write horrible QBasic programs, because it just felt like an infinite universe where I have autonomy, and it's just different from everything else in your life when you're a kid at that age.
I feel like, I mean, perhaps because I love sport so much, and I was in a place with a really nice climate, and I did have a bit of balance, and I didn't spend every waking hour on the computer, but I did spend a disproportionate amount of time on the computer. You know me now. I mean, I can't code my way out of a paper bag, but I did go through, there was a brief window when I almost could have become one of those people, because I remember when we first started learning coding, like really basic stuff in school, like just basic, 10, go to 20 type stuff.
Right.
Within a day or two, the computer teacher had taken me off the curriculum, and while everyone else just went through the textbook and typed in stuff and did their lessons and tests, I was allowed to just sit in a corner and just make programs. I would just sit there and code things and make games and make things, and the teacher would just come along, every few days and go, wow, it's amazing. How have you done that? So I did get really into it for this brief period. And then it didn't happen. Like then it didn't stick. But I did stay with games, and obviously PlayStation came along, and then the first Tomb Raider game was a real game changer for me too. Because the funny thing with that was I'd heard it was this really cool game, and I went and rented it from the video store when you used to go and rent games, but they didn't have the instructions, and we had no idea how to play it. And I remember really early in the game, we were just in this room, like moving Lara Croft around, just walking into walls and having no idea what to do. And we must have spent like a good 2 hours, me and my mate, thinking, well, this game's ridiculous. It's the most boring game ever. And then just while I was up against a wall, I like pressed a button, and suddenly Lara Croft, bent down and pulled out one of those blocks to reveal a new passageway. And the minute she pulled that block out the way, I was like, oh my goodness, this is something really special. And I got obsessed with the Tomb Raider games. And I went through the first 3 or 4 Tomb Raider games, and it was around that time that I started working as a journalist. And I was still gaming in my spare time for a while, for maybe the first 3 years as a journalist, 3 or 4 years. And then it happened. Then the drift started.
So how old are you at the point where you're trailing off from games?
Early 20s.
Okay. I
made a brief comeback for Uncharted, that Drake's Fortune. Like I really liked the look of that, and I played that one all the way to the end, and I liked that. So that was after I'd moved to the UK. So I must have bought a console when I was in the UK. I did buy a console in the UK, but I never got really, really obsessed with it, and I just haven't been able to get back into it since. And I really want to. Like I feel the desire, but I haven't got whatever it takes to get there. Whatever the activation energy is to get back into games has gone. Like it's like, I can't describe it. It's like falling out of love, maybe, or...
I mean, is apathy what you're trying to describe?
Yeah, I think maybe it's that. And I look at your truck simulator game and think that would really appeal to me, because I always liked games that involved roads and maps, and I loved SimCity and all those sort of things, and all the designing games that I know you get into, like designing your prisons and stuff. I think, that would be really cool, because when I was a kid, I used to love designing pretend houses, or I used to love designing pretend racetracks and things like that. So I love the idea of designing and creating. When it comes to that next step of going out and buying one or doing it, I just think, no. And part of me does think, that's probably for the best, because I haven't got time. But if I have spare time, I don't want to spend it playing games. I know some people are going to say, do you play games on your phone? And I do have a few games on my phone, and I occasionally will play one, but even then I don't play for very long. And people will say, well, that means you're still a gamer, but it doesn't really mean you're a gamer.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
That's the casual game world. I was talking with my parents about video games last time I was in North Carolina for the summer. They were discussing their circle of friends, and it was like, "Oh, do you know anybody who plays video games?" And they were all like, "Oh, no, nobody plays video games." But as the conversation went on, we're like, "You sure no one plays video games?" Like, "Oh yeah, no, nobody does." The end result of this was, though, that in their circle, nobody thought of themselves as playing video games, but many people had casual games on their phone that they would play, right? But everybody seems to put this in a different category in their mind. It's like, oh, I don't play video games. I've just sunk thousands of hours into Candy Crush on my phone, but I don't play video games.
No,
right?
I have a few games on my phone, but I definitely don't sink that. I'll play it for 1 or 2 hours over the course of a week and then never open it again.
Yeah. So I think what we're talking about here is something slightly above the level of like just a casual thing on your phone to play for a few moments when you're standing in line. Like that's a different kind of game. And yeah, I think those surveys that try to reach about like, oh, look, everybody in the world plays video games. It's like, yeah, but I don't think that's what people think about when they're talking about video games. But
yeah.
So you've just lost love. That's what's happened to you, Brady.
I've just lost it. Yeah. And I wonder why I have or you haven't. That's what I'd like to figure out, because you're well past the point where I'd lost interest.
Yeah.
Even though you are just a babe.
Yeah, 5 whole years younger than you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like a grown ass man who still plays a ton of video games, right? And
were you? I mean, obviously you've created a job for yourself now where you have a lot of spare time. But even when you were teaching and you had like what I would call like a normal hours job, were you into your games then?
Yeah, teaching was the nadir of my video game playing by far. There was definitely a break the year that I was doing teacher training and my first year as a teacher, where I don't think I played a single video game for that entire span because there just was no time available at all. Like those are brutal years for any new teacher, and it just wasn't a possibility. And then as my teaching career went on, and as I got better at it and better at managing my own time and having materials from the past years, I did have more time to play games. And it was something that I slowly started to get back into after a big break. And in some ways, I do wish that I could be like you, right? In some ways, I wish that I could be apathetic about games. In a on the one hand, on the other hand kind of way.
Like I wish I could be apathetic about sport like you are.
Right.
Yeah.
There's definitely sometimes a feeling of like, is this actually how I want to be spending time? Like that thought does cross my mind. And of course, as I get older and as mortality looms larger on the horizon, like you become more aware of that quite naturally. But I also know that games are a huge and enjoyable part of my life. And that's why there was this break for 2 years when I didn't really play them. But I remember having a couple of conversations with my wife around the time that I was getting back into games about how like, this is something that I deeply enjoy in a way that I enjoy no other kinds of things. Like this is a unique form of entertainment that is different for me and that is also highly meaningful. And I was just amazed going back through some of the pictures that I happen to have of my younger life, of trying to find like birthdays and Christmases and looking around and saying like, oh, look, my parents got me video games at like every birthday and Christmas. And just thinking about how like, man, I have such strong, intense memories that are related to some of these games.
Yeah.
I think just a very easy example is a game like Myst, which was kind of a classic in the 90s, but where you explore this island and there's some puzzles. I normally hate puzzle games, but this one just happened to catch my attention. But I spent so many hours playing that game that when I think back on it every once in a while, like in the real world, there are places that I go to and I think this is so Myst-like. For example, in London, there is this footpath that goes under the Thames at Greenwich. And I cannot go there without thinking of that game Myst, because it looks like this is something right out of Myst. And that island, I swear, the part of my brain that remembers physical places that I used to spend a lot of time, like my school when I was a kid or the house that I was growing up, that island of Myst is as physical in my mind as any of the other places that I have ever been. Like some games can give you a sense of place. And I just think that that is valuable and interesting in a way that other life experiences are not. So when I didn't have video games in my life, I missed them. And I'm very glad that I now have them back in my life, even if I do have occasional fleeting moments of like, is this how I want to spend my time? But I think anytime you're consuming any form of entertainment, it's a very natural thought to have. Like, I think that sometimes when I'm watching movies or anything like that, the thought flits through your mind of like, is this the best way to spend your limited hours on Earth? And it's like, well, yeah, I do really like doing this kind of stuff. But I am sympathetic towards your apathy, and in some ways find it admirable, like you said, in the way that you find my apathy towards sports admirable.
The funny thing is, I'm slowly starting to feel it happen to me with sport as well. Not as dramatic, and I still really like, especially really like cricket, but I'm a bit less engaged by a few sports than I used to be, and I watch a lot less of it than I used to. And I think you're right. I think it's time. I think I just don't have time for all these things anymore. And like I could give them time. I don't want to give them the time. I would rather do either work or other things. And I don't know. So I think it's a bit of a, I think I would almost be copping out or almost humble bragging to say, oh, it's because I'm more successful now and I'm doing all these things and I haven't got time to play games and watch sport. I think there is an element of choice in it. You know, I could put a few of these things on the back burner and play games or watch more sport if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I want to do the other things. I'm more drawn to them.
Yeah, I mean that's this goes back to, you know, what I always feel about like human interest. There's no explaining why people find things interesting or boring. Right? When you look across a bunch of different humans, things that one human finds incredibly interesting, another human finds incredibly boring, and there's no way to explain that. The video game thing, the reason this topic caught my attention when you brought it up, talking about how you've lost interest in it, is that I have observed a phenomenon in myself many times when I am playing games that I find interesting, which is that there's a certain kind of game that I'm playing, and for gamers, it's usually something like a dungeon crawler or any kind of game with an RPG element to it, where I will have been playing a game for maybe 10 hours and intensely interested in continuing onward with the game and advancing a character and collecting more items in the game world. And then suddenly, and I mean within the space of 5 seconds, I go from I could not be more interested in this game to complete and total apathy in the game. It's like a switch just flips in my brain and I know, oh, okay, I'm done with this game. I will never play this game ever again. I have just 100% totally lost interest in it.
And it's not because you finished it or like, you know, conquered it. It's just something happened.
Nope. It's I have accomplished nothing or finished anything. There's just some moment where it's like, boom, something in my brain has changed and I have no interest in it. Not disinterest, just none. And of course, this again is one of these things, like it ties into my whole notions of free will and things like this. To me, it's one of these moments where it seems so apparent, like free will, like, of course I don't have it. What on earth can explain that in the space of seconds, I go from finding a thing incredibly interesting to finding it totally uninteresting? Like I would love to be able to be in an MRI machine when this happens, because it's so sudden and so obvious. I feel like there must be something that people can see. And it's not like, oh, I've grown tired of it for the day. It's just like, no, this game is dead to me now. I just have no interest in playing it ever again.
Have you seen the film? Is it Closer? It's got Clive Owen, Jude Law, Natalie Portman, and Julia Roberts, and it's like about relationships. And the Natalie Portman character is like in love with this guy who like just does the wrong thing by her all the time, and she just keeps going back to him and still loves him. And then she just in 2 seconds one day she just clicks and falls out of love with him, like just completely. It just all changes in like a heartbeat. It's a really powerful scene in the film, and that's what it reminds me of what you just said. Like it's completely like it's like something just tipped. Whether there was like a, you know, was it a tipping point of something? Or,
yeah, I don't know what it is, other than to say there's obviously something physical that's happened in my brain. Something about the dopamine reward cycle for this particular activity is just broken. just broken immediately and irrevocably. Like it's just
Eh,
is not coming back.
huh.
And that to me, why, like, it's interesting, the idea like you have lost interest in
Yeah.
games over time as you have gotten
Maybe
older.
that's what happened to me, Gray. Maybe that happened to me, but on a macro level rather than a micro level.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering, right? Has this same process occurred in you just over a longer period of
Oh,
time?
I like that. I like the idea that something physical has broken, like you're saying, like some reward process or some chemical thing that I used to get just stopped. That would
Yeah.
be a really powerful explanation. I quite like
Well,
that.
yeah, but I mean, obviously that's the only explanation that there can be, that there's something different in your brain. I mean, what other explanation can there be for you not having interest in it?
Yeah.
It's just like loving your wife, Brady, right? It's all because of something physical in your brain. It can't be anything else. You're like, ooh, what an amazing explanation. The structure of my brain is the cause of my
Yeah, but
feelings. I can't believe that.
oh, come on. I mean, it's not. But you're making it sound like one conveyor belt suddenly breaks and you lose interest in games. I'm sure. The thing that makes one like games or love a person is an incredibly complex web of many, many things, and you couldn't put it down to just one thing breaking or changing. So,
When I say one thing breaking, I don't mean that there's a single neuron that just broke, but that there's
mm,
some system in the brain which has changed.
mm,
And again, just with the games, like, that is to me just the most transparent thing ever. It's like, I cannot believe how my subjective experience of a thing can be so radically altered with nothing apparently being different. The game hasn't changed, I haven't changed. I'm just sitting here doing the thing that I've been doing for the last 2 hours.
but the thing that makes your falling out of love with a game in like 5 seconds so compelling and harder
Mhm.
to understand is that I imagine what you get from games or sport or whatever you're into is really, really complicated. Like there's like, is there, what I'm saying, is there one thing that can break that would make you stop liking games immediately? Or do lots of things have to break? Like a plane can keep flying
Mhm.
if component A breaks or component B breaks or the left engine goes out or something. But if a certain number of things break, the plane will fall out of the sky. But there are also a few deal breakers, like if the wings fall off, the plane's going to crash no matter what. So, do you fall out of love with a game because the wings fell off, like the one important thing you were getting from that game broke? Or did a few things all break at once? Like, were you no longer interested by the storyline? Were you no longer getting your dopamine? Were you no longer, I guess that's what I'm getting at. Because I feel like me falling out of love with games is a widespread failure. Lots of things failed. Whereas you can't just enjoy a game and not like a game 2 seconds later because a whole bunch of things changed at once. That would be too big a coincidence.
Well, again, your analogy is terribly confusing to me, but
Hmm.
I just
Right.
know that this is a thing that happens all the time to me when playing games. Like, it is recurrent and frequent, and that's why observing it is always interesting. And sometimes I try to catch myself, like, what has happened, and the answer is I have no idea.
That says to me you're getting one simple thing from gaming, though, like, or from your enjoyment of those games. There was just one very simple thing you were getting, the biscuit for the dog, and suddenly the biscuits ran out. It wasn't like there was like all these things going on that were making you love the game. Like you weren't enjoying it on numerous levels because I can't imagine all those levels would fail at once.
That's why I think that the kind of games that this happens to me in usually have mechanics that relate around exploring and collecting and crafting items. They are almost always games where you don't get better at the game. The character in the game improves and can do things better. Right? So it's like, oh,
Right,
you're fighting monsters. You can fight monsters better because you have better swords, not because you have learned a skill. Like, that is the
right,
common factor in those. And the closest I have come to figuring this out is, like, at some point my brain just kind of sees through the mechanics a little bit too far into what the game is doing and then just totally loses interest. That's my basic guess. But when you talk about losing interest in games, one of the things that's interesting to me is I am always just impressed by the incredible wide variety of what games encompass in the modern world. It's very easy to think of games as just a narrow subset of genres. Like, basically a lot of people when they think of video games, they think of like, oh, the AAA kind of games, right? Big shoot 'em up, central character focused kind of games. But like the universe of games is just so enormous that they are this expanse of various forms of entertainment, some of which are remarkably ungame-like. And I put Truck Simulator in there as a thing which is like, is this a game? I don't think this is even a game at all. Like this is driving a truck across a virtual horizon. Like this to me fulfills a totally different need and form of entertainment than anything remotely game-like would be. And I think that's one of the very interesting things about modern games. And so I wonder about you getting back into games. Like, are there other kinds of entertainment that you would enjoy that can happen to be experienced in video games, but is not necessarily like the games that you may have played when you were younger? Like, I think of a game I really enjoyed a few years ago called Year One, which is also a thing that I would classify as barely a game. It is much more of like an interactive story, and most of the time, games that market themselves as interactive stories are just disasters. They're just terribly boring. But this was one that I spent quite an enjoyable, maybe hour and a half, like it's very short, time working through this little interactive story and exploring this world. And it was much more like a movie like experience, and maybe broadly in the genre of horror. But I really like that, even though I'd be very hard pressed to say, like, was this a game? I don't think it was, even though it's kind of marketed as a game. So like maybe there's stuff along the edges that you might like to play that's less game like than traditional games.
Still, at the end of the day, I mean, that was a short one, but still, at the end of the day, probably the biggest problem is time, which makes me wonder: does your wife play games, or do you play games with her, or is this a completely separate activity for you from, that time with her?
There's two different things that I'm doing here, right? So like, I'm generally unproductive in the afternoons. So if I am not editing a podcast or animating in the afternoons, that's one of the times when I will sometimes play games. Sometimes I just read in the afternoons, but sometimes I'll play games. And then my wife isn't around anyway, so it's like, okay, well, whatever. I'm just on my own here. And that's usually when I'm playing more along the lines of what are like hardcore games, like PC games that require my actual main computer to play.
Yeah.
But the other time that I play games, which is sort of more social, is in the evenings if my wife is watching something. Let's just say she will sometimes select things that I would not want to give my full attention to. That if I was forced to watch with 100% of my attention, I might think were quite torturous to watch. But if I can dial it down to like 33% of my attention, then suddenly it's an entertaining experience for the both of us. Right. And so I like to do a lot of more casual gaming, like on the couch when I'm watching TV with my wife. And that's a much more enjoyable experience because I can make snarky comments about whatever's on TV and make her laugh. And like we're there kind of spending time together, even though I am partly engaged in another activity. But I would find it just intolerable to just sit there and devote 100% of my attention to the TV. Like I would never want to do that. So it's like I think that works well for both of us.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got a good compromise there, and I think maybe that's another big factor for me is now that I'm married, I'm working, and then when I'm not working, I want to spend time with my wife, which I didn't have when I was in my 20s, and
right, of course, yeah, that's the other big thing.
Yeah, so and like
and
my
doggies.
wife's not, and my wife's not into games, and we do like watching the exact same things. So I think when, like in the evening or when we're together, I kind of think we should do things together and we want to do the same thing and be engaged in the same thing. And if I was sitting on a game while she was watching another show, that wouldn't go
down well in the Harron household.
Not just that. I think saying you've got 33% of my attention might not go down well, but it's more a case of, we do watch the exact same things and we want to do that together. So that little window where I could have game time, and when I did have game time as a guy in my 20s, is not there anymore as well. So that's probably another big factor, which exactly ties into time again as well, but it's
Yeah.
another reason that I have less time. So
When I was going through the photos to remind myself of the games that I used to play when I was a kid, all I could think of is, man, I sank hundreds and hundreds of hours into some of these games that I was looking at on photos. And like, it would come up and it would like, man, look at that first Warcraft that you got, kid. Like, you don't know, but you're going to spend 500 hours on that, like just playing it over and over again. Like, oh, look, there's Total Annihilation. Yep. Like, there was your entire sophomore year of high school, right? Like, every free hour you had, like, you played that game. And it's of course, because, like, yes, as a kid, what did I have to do? As we discussed in an earlier podcast, I blew off all my homework as much as I possibly could. And so I spent all of my free time like messing around on a computer, reading a book, or playing a game. The end. Like that. I didn't have any other responsibilities in the world, right? So you could definitely spend so much time in it. Whereas now, I use a program called Steam on my Mac to play all of my games, and they do have a feature where they'll tell you like, oh, how much you have played various games. Like, they'll let you know how many hours you put into a thing.
come
And
on.
I look at them sometimes and it's like, oh, these are sad numbers. Right? It's like,
How much time do you game? How much time do you spend gaming a week? I know it changes because of your production cycle, but what would you, if you had to put a number on it?
if we're talking about something like a thing that I'm actually focused on, so like afternoon gaming, it's probably not more than a couple of hours a week at most. And then the evening gaming is very hard. The casual gaming, maybe like 4 hours a week. I'm just trying to ballpark it here, but so I'm going to say maybe something like 6 hours a week on average.
Are those evening games the same games you play in the afternoon? Or
No,
are
they're
they
different games. They're different games.
Are they like phone games? What are the games you're doing in the evening while you're watching a show with your wife?
Yeah, there's stuff on my iPad, and like they need to have a few requirements. One of which is that the game can't take all of my attention because I need to save 33% of it, right, for the rest of the home environment.
Yeah.
And they also have to be pausable straight away. Like, I can't have a game that I can't immediately just put down and stop.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
in some ways I have to intentionally pick games that are much less engaging than games I would otherwise play. But it's like it's a nice compromise.
So what's an example? Because people are probably going to be wondering what's he talking about. Like what's one of your evening games at the moment?
I have been playing through a game called Crashlands at the moment, which I can kind of recommend. Although that is definitely one of those RPG style games where I know, like, clock's ticking on that one. I'm going to be playing it, in the middle of watching Devil Wears Prada or something, and just going to at some point immediately just put it down and be like, oh, I'm done with you, game. I'm just done. Oh, I play a lot of what are called tower defense games. So something like Kingdom Rush, where you're just placing down little towers to defend yourself from invaders that are coming in. Like, these are casual-ish games. They're not anything that requires a huge amount of focus.
If you thought there was a game at the moment that had a hope of getting me back into gaming, what would it be? If you had one go at it and you really cared about me getting back into it, which I know you don't, you couldn't care less, but
Yeah,
if it was your mission, what would you use?
That's impossible. You're setting for me just an absolute impossible task. You know what this is like? It's almost like you're coming to me and you're saying, I've fallen out of love with movies. I haven't watched movies in 10 years. If there was one movie you were going to give to me to sell me on movies, what would you sell me on?
That's also a great question.
Yeah, but then I just don't have a really good sense of what kind of games you like. Like, even just, you're going through your history and you're talking about some Atari games and things, like, I don't know, man. Like, it would be impossible to pick something to try to get you sold on it. Just again, just because, like I was saying before, there's just so many different genres. Like, there are games, I am convinced there are games for everyone out there, right? Even people who don't think that they like games, there's something for you. You just don't know what it is. Games that to me seem horrifically boring. My favorite example of this is there are games where the whole game is someone shows you like a picture of a messy room and you have to find an object in that room. And that's all the game is. Just like, here's a picture of a room, click on the object in the room. I can't imagine anything that is more repulsive, but like, people love those games. I forget what they're like, object finding games or something. Like, you couldn't pay me to play that, but people love it.
I'll tell you a kind of game that I sink a lot of time into, which I think you wouldn't like, but you would appreciate, and that is football management games or soccer management
Oh my
games to an
God.
American.
Yeah, no.
I quite like those. I thought you would like them because you don't actually play the game. You don't play the soccer, but
Awful.
you manage
Oh
the
my
team.
God.
I thought you'd liked.
Cannot stand those. No, those are
I thought you'd
no,
like it because it's like
no.
work, and you like work-oriented games.
Yeah, see, this is why like, we're just so far apart on so many things.
This is different to a sports video. You did hear me. You were listening to me though, weren't you?
Yeah,
You don't
no.
play the sport.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're
Okay,
talking
right.
about. They're like the management
Alright.
things. No, they're just the worst. They're just the worst. They're
Yeah.
boring. They're absolutely boring. I do have
I
to,
do
I do have
quite
to say
like
that
them.
like as a slight tangent here. Even though I give you a hard time about your darts, your dumb sports that you like to watch,
Mm.
video games have totally given me appreciation for like why people like sports on an intrinsic level. Like I can understand it so much better years later now I'm not in a school anymore that like forces me to play sports, so I feel this intense resentment toward it. Like now as an adult, just playing video games, like I can completely understand the whole sports thing. Both because with certain kinds of video games, pulling off maneuvers is incredibly satisfying when you have a game that you can get better at and you become more skilled at. And it's like, oh, okay, this is similar to when people are learning to play sports. Like it is satisfying to be able to pull off a maneuver well in a sport. And the other thing, which is, you mentioned at the beginning that I was doing this Twitch live stream a couple days ago, like just for fun.
Mm.
And while I was on Twitch, I got sucked into watching this thing that I always think is just so funny, but like esports, and when people are commenting on other people playing video games, but like in real sports announcer voices.
Yeah.
And I was just on Twitch, and it happened to catch my eye, but I saw that like, there was someone commenting on a StarCraft game, and they're like, oh, I spent thousands of hours on StarCraft, like let me watch. And I'm watching this thing and people are commenting on it, and it's like, oh, okay, again, I understand why people watch sports and why people will say something like, if you ever played soccer, you'll like watching soccer so much better. Because I was watching these guys play StarCraft, and it was like, yeah, I got sucked into watching a StarCraft game for 30 minutes because I could appreciate when they were pulling off hard moves, or I could appreciate like what is going on, even if those players were phenomenally much more better at the game than I could ever be if I dedicated my whole life to it. So I do have so much more sympathy for sports because of games, without a doubt. But I'm still going to make fun of you for darts. I'm never going to let that go.
And I'm going to make fun of you for pretending to drive a vehicle on the road in the real world when you could actually just do it.
It's so satisfying, though. It's so satisfying.
I could get into that one. Like, I see the appeal of that one, but I won't.
I'll tell you, though, man, that game is in no small part some amount of self-medication, because what I really want to be doing is driving across America. But this again, like, is the responsibilities of adult life and adult time constraints. I can't actually just ditch my whole life and go drive across America for 6 weeks. So the best thing that I'm going to be able to do is to do it virtually.